Dean Barta. He's been on before, and I'm glad to have him back because we want to talk about priorities, strategy, and competitive advantage. Now, I'm going to start with this particular stat, and then we're going to totally see what shows up in this conversation. Because, before I share the stat with you, I just want to let you know you're in the right place for conversations about how to increase the capacity of yourself, your business, and your leadership team, both through operations and through the financial side. Thank you, Dean, very much for being that placeholder in this conversation. And okay, now the stat, and then Dean's going to introduce himself. 86% say that prioritizing and funding the appropriate initiatives or projects is very important or or essential for competitiveness. Now, that's important to consider. I believe that came from Gartner, by the way. I think that's a Gartner stat from sometime in the last 2 to 3 years. And that's important for a lot of reasons, and we're going to dig into that. But Dean, first, please tell us who you are and how excited you are to be here today and all that good stuff.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jess, for having me yet again on your program. Dean Barta. I have a bookkeeping to virtual CFO firm here in Denver called Barta Business Group. My various titles are founder, CEO, and guide. And because I have a background in adventure travel, skiing industry, all that, and use those guiding principles, anybody on my team that's working with you are really accounting guides, not bookkeeper, controller, CFO, because that's what we're here to do. And I really enjoy guiding myself. I like guiding as well as helping business owners out. So that's why we're here.
Awesome. And I'm your host, Jess Duell. And part of that Bold Business Podcast goodness is also that I'm a strategic business advisor. And here at Red Direction, we provide customizable frameworks to leadership teams so we can fail faster and bounce higher, or whatever metaphor you would like to do, knowing that in the end, it's all about increasing the capacity of who we are, what we are, so we can do more and not only achieve what we want, but Dean will testify to this, have the lifestyle we want also.
Absolutely. You got to have a life too. So in addition to your business. So
cheers to that. That's right. Could be like a new puppy. Speaking of, how's the pup?
On the 31st of this month, we'll be her 1 year birthday. So yeah, she's growing, active, healthy, all the things you'd like to have in any puppy. So, and loves the snow. I think she would live in snow 365 days a year. So
isn't that amazing? My little dog is 2.5 now, and he hates the snow. he sees it out there and he's like, how much trouble am I going to get in if I just go right here? You can actually see it on his little doggy face. And I'm like, get outside. So small things in life. But, when we know where our strengths are and we know where they're not, that means that we can actually be working together better, whether we're dogs or dog lovers or dog owners or colleagues.
Yeah, even dogs have priorities, okay? They have certain strategies as well. So we should be doing better than they have.
Right, exactly. Okay, so how about thank you for that. I always like to do a quick check-in and see just, how things are, what's been going on, all that good stuff. Is there anything else, how things are, what's been going on?
You just always, never a dull moment in business. So, working with, great new clients and, really solving problems out there, it's fun for me. So, relieving people's pain, if you will. So.
Yeah, here, I love the snow that's on the trees, and I'm glad that it's not sticking to the roads. That's really where I'm at, Dean. And a good cup of tea. This one, I think it's elderberry. It's red. I think it's an elderberry tea, which is kind of a fun one to have in the afternoon sometimes. And, other than just finishing up all kinds of great stuff for clients and for Red Direction as a whole, so be on the lookout for all that stuff that you're going to see on social media, people. I am just really glad. I love the fact that we're doing this on a Monday. I love the fact that it's in the afternoon. It's kind of a different time. We'll get to see who, what, where, all of that other wonderful good stuff. Now, you said right before we came on that you had planned ahead. Tell us the first thing that came to your mind on your list for that planning ahead, because we're starting there.
The first thing I had on my list was actually be yourself.
Oh, I love it.
That's what
Yeah.
I wrote down first, because when I was thinking of prioritizing and strategizing and being competitive in your whatever your marketplace may be, it comes down to authenticity. I mean, you have to be yourself first and foremost. You can't just copy whatever the competition is doing. I mean, in case in point with me is I take my guiding background and intertwine it with accounting. And because that's me, that's who I am. It's so ingrained in me. So, and that's also how you stand out in the marketplace, is because there's only one you,
That's
as
right.
a business owner. So,
that's right. Be yourself. Well, and it's true. And as long as we're trying to be somebody else, we have the wrong headspace dedicated to the wrong things, right? We need the right headspace dedicated to the right things, to your point, Dean. And I think that that's so important. When we know what we're good at, that means we can leverage those things. And if somebody comes along and says, well, you need to do it this way, or here's my proven system. Oh, I'm going to go on a rampage. I think it might show up, Dean. I'm like, a proven system is awesome if I were you. So since I'm me and I'm going to use your proven system, how much support do I get to help adapt it to where my strengths are? Because my strengths are going to be different than your strengths, Dean, which are going to be different than all of our listeners' strengths. So without getting too much on the soapbox, because by the way, our proven systems are necessary to get us going sometimes. They're a great way to get unstuck. They're a great way to shake things up. They're a great way to look differently and really do a quick check-in. Where am I strong and where am I not? I'm not knocking that part, okay, of this whole thing. I have a whole different soapbox, but I want to honor what its purpose could be and how we could be better from it. Since no offense, people who have proven systems, because
I think
might someday too.
But I think what you're tapping into, Jess, though, is there is certain frameworks that you work with, but every client, every business has their own individual needs, wants, pain points, whatever you want to call it, in what they want to accomplish. I mean, and here's in the guiding lingo is I've been a wilderness first responder for 20 years, and the patient assessment triangle is, scene safety, and, you check vitals, ABC, all that, which anybody who's taken first aid, has seen at least a little bit of that. That is the structure, but it also says if you come on scene to a new business, okay, is go through those questions. Don't automatically, it's a reminder for me, don't automatically just, I've seen this before, this is what it is, and give a prognosis when, no, it's still go through all the process to ask the questions, because things pop up. Oh, wow, this is what we have to do. Just like any, in a wilderness backcountry medicine situation, what you think, it'll actually get you more into trouble if you think, oh, it's already this. And then you're like down some, the path that doesn't serve, the business owner. So.
Oh, it's true. And so that comes all the way back to be yourself. And I'm going to add to that, because the thing that I brought that pairs up to that is know what you won't compromise. That was one of the things. That was one of the things that I was going to bring to the table today. And it's when you know yourself and you know what you won't compromise, well, that's great, because now you know how to show up to your role. And then you know where the difficult conversations are to better help other people understand what they won't compromise either. I'm not saying it's difficult because people don't understand you, or that I am not going to be willing to show up differently to get to an outcome that benefits everybody. What I'm saying is I understand where that line is and where I cannot go, because I'll feel like,
it's more difficult strategically, but emotionally. And if you've got to if it's a drag to move, in that direction, it's not in alignment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that comes up over and over and over again. Dean, I did a survey at the end of last year, and I was asking business owners, a whole bunch of questions. And by a whole bunch of questions, I really meant 5, because we don't need a whole bunch of questions to know what's going on. And there were some really interesting commonalities about where they felt they ended 2020 and where they were thinking 2021 was going to begin. And so I put all the responses that I received, plus some research from people who've been doing this a lot longer than we have, into the mix, and just was like, well, what's going to come out? Well, what was unanimous across what like Gartner and McKinsey and those companies, research companies, were bringing to the table as what was happening in 2021, plus what we were seeing actually happening in businesses that we serve. We might work with some, but we had some that we don't work with also responding. And so when you put that mix together and you see everybody wanted to improve business preparedness.
Oh,
okay. So I put together a report. I was like, well, here are 5 things we could do. Actually, is that really right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Here are 5 things we can do with the end result, to plant the flag at the top of the mountain. Here's what we do to improve business preparedness. And, kind of playing on that, be yourself and know what you won't compromise, is being clear about what the priorities actually are, not what they could be.
Right. Yeah, that preparedness. I mean, and it's so, apropos from the last year. It's like, hey, who was prepared, 14 months ago? Some people were more prepared than others. But yeah, a good lesson that, it's easier to move on your toes than it is your heels. So
yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
So yeah, preparedness. I can definitely I concur with those those responses as well. And yeah, actually that comes up. Yeah, that dovetails into one of the other notes I have, is that be really clean about what's important to you, but also what's important to your clients. And because I could, push in a certain direction when it comes to strategy, but that's important to me. But if that doesn't really hold value for the client, then that's, once again, it's out of alignment there. So
yeah.
and there's that, I've got to check in to see, okay, what's best for the client. Is that alignment with me? My values too. So there's a constant is checking in with, those core values or purpose or mission or whatever that is for an organization. So, but it's really, how, what's going to serve the client with the skill set, that I bring to the table, or my company brings to the table.
There are a lot of companies I'm working with that right now that have spread themselves too thin over the years. I do this, I do that, I do this. Could you also do that, since you do all this other stuff for me? And the answer is typically, of course we can. Even though we're not necessarily the expert in it, we take it on because we already have that relationship. And how about a little extra revenue? Mm-hmm. The thing is, when you end up doing that and you end up with all of these products or services that don't sell well, none of them are like outpacing the others, then it's almost like an internal competitive landscape of the race to the bottom. How do you give that product or service enough attention? How do you decide to put it on the chopping block? How do you decide what are the things that are really important and do we even need it anymore? To your point about what do the customers want? Because part of the vision, mission, values, and how we do work and what our strategic goal is for right now, hopefully includes is knowledge of when customers outgrow us. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? And based off of their needs, they might not, outgrow could be, we just don't serve their need anymore. Not that there was some sort of a progression that exited them into something else. And were we trying to grow with them or not? It's, well, when do they outgrow us? What does that look like? And so I find that fascinating. Have you ever encountered companies like that they waited a little too long, or were a little too they had too many products and not enough revenue for said products?
Yeah. Actually, I was in a company where we were an adventure travel company, and we had a line of business. We had started as and this is out of Boulder. One of our line of business was mountain biking only trips.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And hey, been an avid mountain biker for 25, 30 years. And I'm the one that cut the program because I said, hey, you have these other lines of business that are much more profitable.
Yeah.
And we were spreading ourselves too thin to an area that was really a fraction. It was like 10% of our business. And it wasn't a popular decision, but it was the right decision to focus on these other two lines of businesses that are much stronger, bigger, client base. And we still had mountain biking as part of one of those lines of business. So it wasn't like we, did away with it entirely. It just wasn't, we got rid of a program that just wasn't, wasn't part of our mainstream anymore. It probably was early on when the company was first developed, but it wasn't when in that period of time.
Yeah.
And so, we got rid of it. And it's, it can be hard decisions because wow, we've had this for a long time. But, once again, we looked at what is our main, clients, how can we best serve and we were being authentic about that. And sometimes, those changes can be painful, but we also became a much more profitable company because of it too.
That's the key. So, right there. We became a much more profitable company because of that. And I feel really strongly about that. And I will tell you, there are things that are on what we do at Red Direction that probably should go. And in fact, some have already gone. And that first round of here's what we're just not going to do anymore. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to do it. We're going to really hone in and focus. And I think about that in relationship to what you're saying, because there is a trueness to it, which ties back into our first point, be yourself and know what you won't compromise. And then into the second one where we're talking about setting priorities and what the customers actually need, because if all we do is keep our nose to the grindstone and we don't take a look at what's happening to companies, what are our clients' needs, how are they changing? And I will tell you, there seems to be, and this is my sense, Dean, you can tell me if you sense differently, but it seems like business to business and business to consumer are farther apart than they ever have been before in terms of approaches and the actual need and how interaction must occur. I think there was always a little bit of a blend, but it seems like as we're going through this year and as we're going to go into the future, that there's a bigger break, and we got to know who is our customer, and is it a business also serving consumers, or is it the end user? Are we part of a chain somewhere? Because I think we can forget what our role actually is in a bigger picture in a business to business environment.
Yeah.
Or even business to consumer. I guess both would fit.
Yeah, I think, I think there is, definitely some delineation between that and I think I don't have any personal experience, but just overall, I'd say yes. There's because if my business was serving business to general public, let's say, I mean, it's just a much different approach to it, and all that versus I'm here serving businesses, okay, which are serving clients, in different ways, whether it's products or services, but their needs are different because they, these types of businesses that both you and I focus on and work with, they're like, how can we strategize and make our operation better for ourselves and for our clients? So it's almost a twofold, because we're helping them with two different things, or to target two different things: their own company and their end user customer. So
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick plug right here. Dean is here with me, and I'm Jess Duell, and we are talking about priorities, strategy, competitive advantage, and tea and dogs. So you never know what's going to show up in this conversation along the way.
You
And
can you can post, you can post your dog photos if you want.
that's right. That's exactly right. I'm telling you. All right. Whether it's and what's actually in your cup in the afternoon, I'm kind of excited about that. And I know it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, so that could get exciting and fun too. So anyway, what we were talking about, we have been talking about on this live stream about how, and well, we've been talking generally, and I want to get right down to it. I want to get right down to, well, if I had to choose something to go forward with when I'm thinking about priorities, strategy, and competitive advantage, what would that be? And I'm going to set the stage this way. Up through 2020, you can actually you could actually pinpoint on a regular basis what percentages, and they only changed a little bit year over year. How do we improve the experience of our customers? How do we introduce new products and services? How do we get more reach in the markets that we already have? How do we find and retain talent, right? Those are things that have had over the years have had these very, 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 very specific stats and information that people have tracked. And it's almost like it was incremental. If I focus on these things and they stay our things, well, we're probably good because everybody else is doing them too. But here's the thing, and you actually brought up one of these already, Dean. The thing is that from now, where we're at today in 2021 and into the foreseeable future, are those still important? Of course. But they're not going to be as important as focusing on e-commerce and getting to the customer, whether it's a business or whether it's a consumer, in the ways that they actually need and want to be able to work today, which is drastically different on so many levels. Another one is being able to stay connected while we work remotely and being able to move at some point back and forth between physical togetherness and working remotely. And how do you stay connected in that? There's always been dispersed teams and there's always been in-person teams, but there's never been a hybrid that we get to work with today. And I'll pick one more, that the need to embrace change quickly is more important than ever before. And when we're thinking about priorities and we're thinking about our strategy, how one of those things that's now starting to show up and bubble up is, well, how adaptable are we? How quick could we respond? What is our actual downtime? Is there going to be a break in our control or out of our control? And exactly where are those as we go along?
Right. And we've mentioned this before. We've talked about this before about, the flexibility, what you're talking about adapting is, and my stance, I really don't like the word pivot because of
me neither.
Yeah, because it's like, when I think of it, I actually think of more like the turret on a tank. Okay.
Right.
It pivots and you're shooting this way, right? So a pivot, all it does is you're not really changing, you're just moving in a different direction, but you haven't really changed. It's not really flexible. And what successful businesses have done in the last, 12, 13 months is they've been flexible about, okay, how do we need to flex to still serve our clients and still say serve great food, and if you're a restaurant, how do you do all that instead of, no, we're a sit down restaurant, this is the way we do things, and
Yes.
don't, then we're and a lot of businesses closed out of choice. Some of them closed out of choice just to say no, that we're not going to flex to pick up and take out and all that other stuff, and they just said, we'll just open again when all this is over. So
Right.
So, I mean, that's authentic to them, to approach it that way. But some, just couldn't flex, to meet those, demands of their businesses and, and what their clients needed. And the other point you mentioned too is this hybrid, of, hey, remote and not, and how do we flex with that? But it's also, it still comes down whether you're in person with clients or your own team, or remote, is you still have to have a connection even on a personal level. And even, about 11 months ago, as I was telling clients at the time, when you have a phone call with one of your clients, ask them how they're doing and do this. This is all through last summer, fall, winter, is, you know, make it more personal than it's just about business because, and I said, be authentic about it. Okay. Don't, this is not okay, I'm always going to ask them about this. And probably because I do that because that's just who I am. I'm like, hey,
Right.
how's your puppy? How's your kids? How are your parents doing in the
Yeah.
nursing home? And, you know, and that has proven to be, I think, at least in my experiences, people are like, they remember that personal connection. And whether it's with employees or customers alike, that, you know, they remember how when things are dark, from the economy or even on a personal side, it's like, hey, someone cared, even though it's, business to business. So, I mean,
Right.
you probably have had, some examples of that working, say in the last year.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right here at home at Red Direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of and we're a dispersed team already, right? So
Yeah.
nobody is in the same place, and it works out pretty well for us. But what we had to deal with, and to some extent, we're still trying to figure this out. When we're working wherever we're working, and now even though we are not in the same physical place across different states, if we weren't working at home, but we now are, and the other adults in the house are working at home instead of wherever they were, if they were working at all, because sometimes they weren't working. And then if there were kids or if there are aging parents in the house and all of their needs, all of a sudden we went from a dispersed team to a dispersed team with a whole bunch of family and people all under the same roof that required attention too. So
Right.
work time did not look the same as work time had in the past. And it's not going to. And it's crazy how we're still, with the launch of the podcast this season, how bumpy it is, even though we have a process, even though we have steps to follow, even though we know what the dates are. All of that stuff has been extra bumpy because of the new situation that we're in. And so I'm holding the space of course it's bumpy because it's our first one in this season 4. And behind the scenes, I'm really recognizing that's okay because we all are showing up to this differently than we did when we closed out the season 3, even though it was in December, only 3 months ago. We were able to hang on and get through. But then when we had the space to let things settle a little, it does look different today. And so glad to have steps, glad to have a process. To your point about frameworks, if we didn't have a framework to adapt and to flex, makes me think of, I think the B-2 bombers are like this, right? The stealth bombers, that they actually have spaces in them. I've seen them, really up close in person, but I can't remember exactly, that have spaces in them. So, and the SR-71, I think, might have been like this too, because they go so high up into the atmosphere that the pressure and all the other stuff that happens once you're way up in the atmosphere actually pushes the metal pieces together, and you don't want it to be like little mountains when you come back down. That would destroy the plane, right? So you
Yeah.
need to have that space in there. And when you were talking about tanks, that's actually what was popping into my head, was planes. And now all we need is a car. I don't know. Planes,
I don't know why tank came up in my, but it just, probably because it's so rigid. But anyway, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
good story also about the stealth bombers because, and that's also in business, is when things are more pressurized is when you have to be more flexible.
That's right.
You have to, you got to, whether, I mean, even in mountain biking, it's the same way. Is like your tendency is like if you're going down something steep or something, is you tense up. Well, that's the worst thing that can happen because that's just makes everything so rigid. If you loosen up the important parts you're supposed to that aren't really essential, you don't loosen your grip, of course. but you also don't have kung fu GI Joe kung fu grip on it either. But you gotta be enough flexibility so you can handle the flexes in changes that happen. when things are really, intense. And yeah, that's probably a whole other new podcast, just running
Right?
into, emotional intelligence too. But
Woo, just a little. Well, I think it's huge because, and I guess today you're right. It could be its own thing, and of course we touched on it because it's a part of this bigger picture. All of these moving parts, and we expect the parts to always work, and because business has always been a certain way. Well, and it's just different now, and that ability to understand, to your point about first aid in the wilderness, it makes me think of a story about my dad. I drove this little car. I think it was a Plymouth Rabbit. Was that a thing? It was this little silver car.
VW Rabbit, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then it was a Plymouth. So it was something
Oh,
else.
it's like a Plymouth Horizon. It was about the same size car, early '80s or something like that.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this was like, it didn't have any paint on it anymore. Okay.
Yeah, those were the disposable cars of the 1980s.
Yeah.
So.
And it was a little stick shift, and I carried a pocket knife in the glove box because the carburetor would always overfill or whatever it is. It's been a long time since I've done this.
Yeah.
Thank you. The thingy that was in the thingy that flooded prevented the engine from turning on. So I had a pocket knife to leave the thing open so that the stuff could drain and I could get my car to turn on. Okay. So this was a little trick that I just had wherever I was happening to be. Now you know my age, right? 16, 17. And I remember my dad, something was off with the timing, and my dad was a mechanic in one of his former careers, and pulled out these tools we had in the garage. It's also the coolest garage I've ever had. We have anything you need in there, we could have found in there. He replaced, he actually might have replaced the thingy that was flooding, the little flipper deal that's on this little part of the, boy, people who know cars, I apologize.
I don't know what it's called, but I know exactly what you're talking about in the carburetor.
Got this thing, and it was basically broken or cracked or something, and it was part of the problem that I had to stick this pocket knife in there to hold it open so that my car could start. And by the way, this car's name was Fred. And Fred, so one Saturday, if he was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. My dad says, I'm ready to do this. And I'm like, what are we doing? He goes, just follow me. We're going to work on Fred. And I'm like, okay. So we go out and pull it into the garage because it was nasty weather in Kansas that particular spring day. And he takes it apart and he holds it up and he goes, I need one of these. And then he's looking around our garage for this random part. Okay. Talk about flexing. We don't have one. We don't have one of those, but you know what he has? He has scrap metal. And scrap metal, we had all the right tools to be able to heat and shape and cut this scrap metal into this little flipper doodle thingy to be able to put back into this carburetor to be able to close the thing. And I didn't have to use the pocket knife anymore. So how cool is it that that's a really long story, I know, but we have this concept of, if we take the time to really know what we have, if we take the time to understand what the exact problem actually is, then we can actually look around for what we have and see if we can fashion the right part, even if it's not inherently the part that came out of the box for it.
Well, that's what makes you a good strategist and consultant because
you come by it naturally.
I mean, you should tell that story more often to clients.
You like that?
Well, right, because you learned at a young age from your father is like, hey, if this is what we have to work with, then this is what we have to work with, and it's very similar. I was tracking with the whole story because I grew up on a farm, and you were 30 miles from the nearest parts store, so. That's sometimes you have just to fashion stuff out, and there's some creativity involved and all that, but you could probably fashion it faster than it takes to go pick up that part, or even if the part is even in there, so,
right.
You're available. So and when you need it, you need it. So you've got some good, real world lessons to apply with your clients.
Totally happened on a regular basis. Something every weekend came out of that garage. Sometimes unexpected like that. That's my favorite story because it's the one where I got to learn a little. You can tell I retained it real well. I learned about my car. I did all these other things. But okay, so let's take that and let's put it here today.
Hmm.
My dad would still have the stuff in his shop to do and work on a car like that. But I don't know how many of us, even my dad, has had to give up working on his new cars because there are things, they're all computerized. And so there are elements of stuff that work differently because technology has evolved. And there was a point where, where there's only so much you can do on your own now. And
Right.
unless you learned all of that. And I'll be real, that's actually something. Do you want to go learn about that part of cars? In my story, the answer was no. I'm going to take it to a mechanic and I'm going to make real good friends with the mechanic. Fred is somebody's flower pot somewhere now these days. I have no doubt. That's all he was really good for when I drove him. But to the point of what you were saying about fashioning, we also have to know where our skills end, so we know if we need a solution, we can come plug it in so that we can stay on priority. And that's where people like you and me come in, Dean, right? You want to be able to plug us in and then unplug us and plug us in and unplug us so that we can really be strategically helping you keep on priority to have that competitive advantage. Otherwise, when the car dies and you run out of scrap metal in the garage, you're not going to be able to do anything anymore.
Well, because none of us, whether personally or with our business, we don't have a perfect 2020 vision into our own companies or into ourselves. That's why, people, you reach out to people who can give that honest, authentic insight, and they've got to be really, skilled at what they're doing. Okay. But you bring in, the mechanic who's like, okay, and here's that can assess and or bring in, either one of us into a company is, that can say, hey, so why are you doing it this way? Or, what has been the pros and cons of doing it a certain way, I guess. And how can we, move you along faster instead of, how long did it take your dad to like fashion parts and all this? I mean, hours and hours and hours.
All Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, all Sunday afternoon. Well, yeah, we're in a, let's say, faster paced world these days
Right.
where, and I've used the example before. I'm like, I can install a dishwasher. It takes me 3 hours, where a typical person takes 20 minutes. Now, I don't want to spend 3 hours of my time doing that. And it's well worth whatever I pay to have someone do that,
Mm-hmm.
and because that's, they're good at it. I know it'll be done right, and all that. So yeah, I mean, it's important to have that, professional help, and some companies, they move it as far along as they can.
Right.
And you probably have experienced this even, and I have, is many clients are like, oh, I wish I would have talked to you 6 months ago.
Right. Right.
It would have
Yeah.
saved us a lot more time and headache. And I
Mhm.
go, yeah, it would have. And,
But the
but
thing is, you don't know until you recognize you don't know what you don't know, or you recognize you've been doing something under false assumptions.
right.
They're not ready for somebody like us, and I'm okay with that too. By the way, because I fall into that. There are people I wish I had called 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And to my point, I thought I had what I needed. I had to go down that path. I had to do some of these things. And well, the good news is once once is enough for me. I've learned my lesson,
Right.
team, right? Like the dishwasher, I'm with you.
Yeah, I did that. Really, I did that once, and I'm like, no, and no, it never leaked. Okay, all that, but I will not
Mhm.
do it again. I was like, no.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Well, and I love that we get to specialize too, because to the point of there's an element of being resourceful and compared to being a person of all trades, if you will.
right.
And I wonder, that might have to be a whole conversation. Ooh, that's like really exciting in my brain. And of course, it's happening toward the end of our conversation. But it's this concept. Maybe this is part of it when we're talking about our competitive advantage. Where do we where is it important to stop being resourceful and bring in other knowledge for whatever reason?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's when is that decision point? And we could
Yeah.
probably not to put us both on the spot, but there's probably three main indicators is on when that decision point happens. And yeah, we can definitely save that for a different
Sounds
live.
like you have them. You have three.
I just, like I said, I put both of us on the spot on this.
Oh,
So,
okay, got
uh,
it. I was like, really? You have 3 already?
yeah.
So what was the thing? It was resourceful versus
Well,
almost versus it's not wasted time, but
well,
it's right. There I said it before and I've lost it. So I'll have to catch it on the other side, but that's okay.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I look at it. So for me, it's more of an emotional side where it's like, when does it become really frustrating? Because sometimes, when you try to do it yourself, there's an excitement to it. It's like, okay, let's figure this
Yeah.
out. And then you get to this tipping point where it's like, no, this is arduous, and we're not going anywhere. And when do we decide that
Well,
we're it'd be like finding your dad, continue to find a part. And it's like,
right.
oh, there's something, and he keeps digging in drawers or whatever to find what, there's a point. It's like, no, this is unproductive.
Hmm.
And it is for either the person or the team that's working on this to say, okay, this is unproductive. We got to bring in, someone who's can get us through this more efficiently.
Right. And that outside set of eyes is almost always it in some form or fashion. I'll tell you what, it could be your best friend. If they don't know your business, I don't recommend that, but it could be. It could be just talking out loud to your dog, by the way. I just talk out loud to myself. Find that helps too. What else could it be? It could be just, hey, we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube together. Reach out to Dean and ask a question. He'd be glad to answer it. Reach out to me, ask me a question. I'd be glad to answer it. Right. And we can find out. Is all you need is a little shape shift? Is all you need is a different perspective? That's what we're here for. And reach out to the other business owners, too. It's another great resource.
That's
Somebody that may have already been there.
Yeah, I've yet to meet a business owner that wouldn't help another business owner because they've
Right.
been there.
That's right.
Maybe a competitor, probably less likely, but really, you're gonna have 9 out of 10 business owners that will say yes. Please
Mhm.
reach out, because I've been frustrated like that before, and no one wants to see that pain replicated.
Exactly. Nobody.
Yeah.
No.
We have some direction we can go. Some
That's exactly right. I'm making notes. We even got a sticky note out of this. All right. So what is something that's on your mind that hasn't been said because it didn't have a place in the conversation, but you're like, it goes here in this one?
I mean, the only other thing that we've touched upon it is, I'm a big proponent of single tasking, but that's really more like focus. And you had mentioned about it's not spreading yourself too thin over things that are less important, or sometimes those fringes are just a lot more work for not really, a huge return too.
Yeah.
So, but it's, hey, narrow and deep. Well, stay narrow and deep with your business. And, you know, because here's an old farm saying, the fox that chases 2 rabbits gets none. So it's just you that's what happens with any business owner, anybody who's trying to manage and work with all these different lines of businesses or whatever. And you end up doing not any of them very well. Just focus on what you do well, and be clean about it.
Thanks for joining us. It's time for you to add your experiences to this conversation, your thoughts, your insights. So whether it's on this feed, whether it's on Dean's feed, whether it's someplace else around social media, make sure you share, because that's what it's all about. We get to learn from each other. We also get to learn from let me say that differently. When we take the time to learn from each other's experiences and incorporate other information into the way that we work and show up in our roles, the better we will be at flexing, adapting, which directly influences our success reaching our priorities, our success aligning our strategy to daily action, and our competitive success in the marketplace. Thanks for listening. This is Jess Stuhl with the Bold Business Podcast. Until next time.